Hello, everyone. Welcome. Thanks for joining us this evening. I am Jason Kuchma, the Executive Director of your Toledo Lucas County Public Library, and I'm thrilled to have you all joining us here tonight. A number of our guests are enjoying a delicious meal, myself included, from Poco Piatti as part of our virtual authors events. If you're interested in joining future author events, you have three different ways to join us. As always, you can watch this for free on the library's Facebook page. You can purchase a copy of the book with a signed book plate for $10 and pick it up at your local branch after the release date. You can watch with a secure Zoom link, or our friends in the greater Toledo region, as tonight is the case, can purchase the enhanced experience, receive a copy of the book with a signed book plate, and have dinner from a local restaurant delivered to your door the night of the program and watch through your secure Zoom link. You can read about all of those upcoming menus on our website. And while you're there, you will also see that in the coming weeks, we have the following incredible people joining us. On Tuesday, next Tuesday, we welcome Sonia Manzano, who many of you may remember as Maria from Sesame Street. 1 week from tonight, we host Kyle Mills, the author of the bestseller Niche Rap series. And on October 22nd, we welcome inspirational American poet and civil rights activist Nikki Giovanni. There are a lot more, including Teresa Caputo and a repeat visit from Dr. Michael Roizen. As I said, all of these events include options for the enhanced experience, where you can get a special meal delivered to your home. And you can check out the menus and the dates and sign up at toledolibrary.org/authors. I'd be remiss if I did not mention that none of this would be possible without the generous financial support of the Library Legacy Foundation. As many of you know, that gifts to the Library Legacy Foundation allow the library to host great programs like tonight's conversation and countless other programs and services that are so vital to our community. We are also incredibly grateful for our presenting media sponsors, the Blade and Buckeye Broadband, our supporting sponsor, the Bureau Group, and the community sponsors, Friends of the Library. Our program tonight is being recorded and will be uploaded to our YouTube channel later. We have staff monitoring the Facebook Live and Zoom chat function, so please send in your questions at any time during the discussion and we'll get to them as soon as we can. I am so pleased to introduce our moderator for the evening. She served as the first female senator elected from North Dakota from 2013 to 2019. And during those 6 years in Senate, she worked across the aisle to fight for North Dakotans. She showed that if senators work together, it can lead to real solutions. She previously served as North Dakota's Attorney General and as the state's tax commissioner. She's also the founder and chair of One Country Project, an organization focused on addressing the needs and concerns of rural America. Please join me in welcoming Miss Heidi Heitkamp. Welcome, Heidi.
Well, thank you so much for having me. And this is really going to be a fun night and a fun conversation. And if you're from the parts of the country that John and I are from, we would say grab your favorite Friday night beverage. My nieces belong to book clubs. We know what they are, book clubs.
Right.
It's an opportunity. It's an opportunity to really enjoy a good discussion about whatever are the issues of the day, but also to recognize the importance of the written word. And so I am so grateful that John asked me to join him in this discussion, Jason.
Absolutely. We're glad to have you here and appreciate this. And now let me mention our featured author for the evening. Though he knew he wanted to take over his family farm from an early age, his path to politics was less clear. His essential experiences on his farm made him a hardworking and productive member of Congress, which often involves getting down in the dirt with Democrats and Republicans alike. He's an average American guy from a small town who eats beef, grows organic food on his family farm, is a gun owner, a grandfather, and also a U.S. Senator who is focused on the most pressing issues impacting the future of our country: inequality, intolerance, injustice, and climate change. In his memoir, Grounded, A Senator's Lessons on Winning Back Rural America, Tester shares lessons from his early life, learned on and off the farm, and what they can teach the Democratic Party about connecting with rural voters across the country. Please join me, everyone, in welcoming the Honorable Senator Jon Tester.
Thank you, Jason. I got to thank you. Thank you very much. And Heidi, we'll get into it here in a second. Thank you for being here. This should be a lot of fun. And I just want to say, Jason, listen to your explanation of what the library is doing, what the Toledo Library is doing. Reading and eating. I mean, you can't get a better combination than that. It just does not get any better than that. And so I just want to thank the Toledo Library and all of the sponsors, everybody who supports it, and most importantly, the folks who have tuned in tonight, because hopefully we'll have a little fun and maybe learn a little bit here and pique some interest. So Thanks, Jason, and thank you all for viewing.
Glad to have you both here, and I'm going to get out of your way and step aside. So I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Well, I want to start out by saying when Jon Tester was running and we found out that this crude cut guy was actually making headway in Montana, we would all smile here in North Dakota because he was our kind of guy. We could recognize that early on. And so Jon came to the United States Senate 6 years before I did. But when I showed up and was doing a lot of campaigning, and Jon will smile at this, someone came up to me and offered the most amazing compliment I ever got. He said, "You know who you are?" And I thought, well, who am I? And he said, "You're Jon Tester in a skirt." and we've always had a good chuckle about that because I think that when you come from places where we come from, and when you've struggled as a Democrat in places that are trending more and more Republican, it's very difficult to see kind of how you cut through that. And obviously, you know, I was able to do it once. Jon was able to do it 3 times. But when I read Jon's book, I was so intrigued by the stories in the book, the stories that formed his life. But I also am always so curious about where titles of books come from. And I think if you read the book, when you read the book, you will experience that sense of grounded, where that comes from. But Jon, I want to ask you first, I think, how is it that you came about that title, and what does that title mean to you?
Well, I will tell you that it's kind of interesting because Murph and I pretty much probably had half the book written by the time we came up with the title, quite frankly. And it was a joint collaboration between Aaron Murphy, who was my former chief of staff, that helped write this book in a big way and did a marvelous job, and myself. And I will tell you that I think we came about it for a couple of reasons. I'm a farmer. Charlotte and I just finished our 43rd harvest about 3 weeks ago, and we farmed the ground. So there's that angle on grounded, and then the influences in my life, whether it was my parents and my mother particularly politically, and my grandmother politically, or it was I went to a fairly small school, probably very small by Toledo standards. The high school that I went to school in had about 160 kids in 9 through 12 when I graduated in 1974. There's fewer than that now, and we can talk about the reasons for that. But the people in that school were kind of like family to me. It was a very small school. Most of the kids that I started first grade in, I graduated from high school with. A few kids moved in, a few kids moved away, but just not very many. And that experience with the teachers and my friends also is a part of grounding and keeping you grounded. But most of all, hopefully what it means to the people when they read the book is that I'm not somebody who bounces off of walls. I'm not somebody who reacts to any little thing that comes down the pipe, but yet tries to play the long game and tries to look at things from more of a longer perspective, because I think that's really critically important for this country. You know, right now, I'll just tell you right now, President Trump has got folks up in arms, and rightfully so. But I do think we need to think what this country needs to be going forward after this president has long been retired.
Well, I want to start with each one of these aspects of your life, because, you know, I knew right away when I saw the title, this is going to be it's going to be much more nuanced than I'm a farmer and I respect the soil and I respect the place that I live. But I want to talk first and foremost about the place. And you spend a lot of time talking about James Hill, who was a railroad baron. And anybody in our part of the world hates Jim Hill if you're a populist or in any way a progressive, because he represents what we're seeing so much today in America, which is that kind of exploitation of working people. but yet the soil is what brings us back. And I have to tell you, Jon, when you talk more than once in the book about your mother saying after a rain she could smell the soil, I so connected with that because I know that smell. I know that feeling of organic matter coming up from the soil. Talk a little bit about your connection and how you ended up being an organic farmer and how you ended up being so connected to your part of the world.
So, and Heidi also knows this. My great grandfather homesteaded in the Red River Valley, West Fargo, and we don't know why Grandpa and Grandpa moved out here. Grandpa scouted it in about 1910, and then they moved out. Part of it was influence from James Hill, I am sure, trying to sell folks a bill of goods for a better life. We guess that maybe my grandmother didn't get along with her mother-in-law very well. They were both very strong-willed people. But to move from maybe the best farmland in the world in the Red River Valley to north central Montana, if you look at it today, knowing both those regions as well as we do now, it didn't make a lot of sense. But nonetheless, they packed up, they did jump on the train, and they moved out here. And Grandpa said that when he came out, it was probably after some really good wet years in 1910, and things looked really, really good. And he said, this is the spot. And, you know, I'm going to tell you, in retrospect, if you look at this area that was very much grassy plains, it had a hard time supporting buffalo, if truth be told. And my grandfather came out and was trying to, figured this is the place we're going to make a living, like we did in the Red River Valley. So, and he made a good choice. But why he stopped here, you know, people say if you're going to ask a question of somebody who's long gone, what would it be? I would love to ask my grandfather why he stopped here, because quite frankly, it's an amazing, it's amazing because we've been able to survive here. Now, let me kind of put this in perspective for you. They moved out here. They patented this place in 1915 because of the Homestead Act. They had a barn blow down. They had all sorts of disasters happen. They had to move back to North Dakota. I mean, you want to talk about tough people. They were tough people. And when I think about all the difficulties my grandparents had making a living out here and my folks had making a living out here, and then we come up with some things like, you know, maybe bad trade deals that the president's working on that hurts our prices, it's nothing compared to what they went through. And so that grounding, Heidi, to what they went through and comparing it to what it is today is pretty amazing. One other thing, and I'm talking too much and I'm going to let you go. Let you take it. But when my grandmother and grandfather moved out here, they planted all sorts of crops. They planted flax, they planted peas, they planted all sorts of crops. Some of them were successful, some of them weren't. And then the area kind of shifted to monoculture wheat, and wheat made this area that I live in, winter wheat in particular. It's starting to move back now, but one of the reasons that that we moved to organics was we didn't get along with chemicals very well. The prices are very, very dictated at the marketplace. There's way too much consolidation, and it just got us into a better, healthy farming method from my perspective, and got us some competition in the marketplace. So it was a win-win for us. Hope I asked you. Did I answer your question, Heidi?
Yeah, you did, and I just want people, and maybe there's lots of people from Ohio and who may have not ever experienced a rain on the Great Plains, and the smell and the beauty of what the landscape looks like. And you know what? I know why. I've been to your farm, and I know why they stopped there. It's a beautiful, beautiful spot with mountains all around and farmland in between, and a real opportunity to be whoever you're going to be, to take every opportunity that you can. And those are your people, Jon. Those are the people who forged you, who built you, who gave you their courage going forward.
So I will tell you what my wife says after a nice rain, and we had one just here. We had one on Labor Day. We got a half an inch of rain here. And by the way, we get about 12 inches on average for a year, so it's not much, but the soil is built so it can sustain good crops by my measure. But when we walked outside the next morning, because I had to fly back to DC the day after Labor Day, Charlotte, my wife, said, "This is what heaven smells like." It really is one of the most marvelous smells that you'll ever come across. It is sweet, it is refreshing, and it is just marvelous. There's nothing else like it. There's just nothing else like it.
That really brings me into a discussion about your mom and your grandma. And I was struck reading the book about how you have really been surrounded your entire life by strong women. But I also was struck by the fact that I think your grandma actually got a college degree, and so did your mom. I mean, that was unheard of at the time. I mean, we brag about my grandmother who actually got a high school degree when women were not getting high school degrees. How do you think their commitment to education affected your life, Jon?
Well, I mean, it was absolutely unequivocally foundational issue for me. My grandmother moved here from Sweden at the age of 16, and I think she moved here for educational opportunities. She had a son, and then she had 3 girls. And the son didn't go to college, but all 3 of those girls did. And they all ended up with degrees, and they all ended up using those degrees. And it just kind of shows, I always think of my grandmother, and she passed away when I was 16 in 1973 at the age of 88. But she was always with it, and she was always looking towards the future. She was always looking towards the future. And I think that's what she was doing with her kids too. She knew the value of public education, and she knew the value of a college degree, even in the 30s, mind you. That somebody was looking, I mean, this is just amazing to me in this day and age, when, especially when right now people are getting denigrated for having a college degree, which doesn't make any sense to me whatsoever. But she understood that, number one, you had to have a strong K through 12 public education system, and she supported it. And she not only supported it with her actions, she supported it with her pocketbook. And then she understood that if these girls were going to have a chance in this world, they needed to go to college, and they needed to get a degree. And my grandparents were not wealthy by any stretch of the imagination. They were just working folks, and they just worked doubly hard to be able to send their kids off to college. In that day and age, it's different than today, where college costs way, way too much. In that day and age, you could still do that. And they did it. And for that reason, I'll just tell you, Heidi, and you know this because you've served with me and I've served with you, and you're in the same way. Public education is the foundation of our democracy. This country would not be here without our public education system. And the fact that we have people that Heidi served with and I continue to serve with that want to destroy our public education system distresses me. And I don't understand what their end game is, other than trying to make the United States into a third world country. And it drives me crazy because I wasn't brought up that way.
Well, Jon, like there's truisms in your life, which growing up the way we did, my grandmother she wasn't German from Russia, but she was from, her parents were from Germany, and my grandfather was from Norway. And they believed that this democracy was dependent on people being educated and people appreciating education. And I think when you look at, and education being available to everyone and free, and you look at it now, and there's kind of this sense that, well, that's really not part of what we need to do in America. And it's frightening. It is frightening what you're confronting. I've been watching, the inability of Congress to provide resources to education systems right now, who are really struggling during COVID to make sure that the school is safe for the kids, the teachers have the resources that they need, and that we continue to educate kids. And it is nothing short of dire that we have to stand up for public education. And when I wear a ring on my finger, it's my grandmother's high school graduation ring. She was so proud. She wore it every day of her life. My aunt gave it to me when grandma died, saying, carry on the tradition. And I just love the stories of your mom and your grandma and the fact that you come from strong women, which might be why I kind of like you quite a bit, because you understand and appreciate all of the values, not just those kind of traditional male values. And so women have had a big influence on your life. And I think that is reflected in your priorities in Washington, wouldn't you say?
Oh, absolutely, and they have. My mother was a very strong person, somebody that I mean, short of being my mother, which you have a certain amount of admiration for, but I watched her cope with things throughout life, and she could prioritize and get things done because she could stay focused, and she was just an amazing human being, and I would tell you also this. She was a teacher, and so were the two sisters. They went to college and became teachers and taught, and as did I, and as did one of our kids, and quite frankly, we've got teachers throughout the family, and it bothers me when people go out and they say teachers don't work hard or teachers are expendable. They're not. They're frontline folks that have almost as much impact on our kids, and in some cases more than the parents do.
Yeah, I want to talk a little bit about your high school experience and two teachers you had. But before I do that, I want to talk about the third pillar of your grounding. And I know her well. Her name is Charla. And I just had to smile when I was reading the book, Jon, about your love affair with Charla. You know, and you don't put it that way. You talk about how beautiful she was and how you competed for her. But I think sometimes people wonder, is that genuine? Is that real? And I can tell you what an amazing story the two of you have, because without Charla, there's no Jon Tester. And I think without Jon Tester, there's no Charla Tester. And so I just want you to talk a little bit about your family and about how your wife grounds you and how that relationship is part of who you are as a human being.
So we got married pretty young. I mean, I just turned 21. Charlotte just turned 19 when we got married, and we've been married for 43 years. And quite frankly, we have had happiness and sadness, and we went through tough times and good times, and it's all the above. And the reason is because she, like my mother, is focused on what's best and not short term but long term, and she is somebody who quite frankly, when I start saying things that may not be the best things to say, she kicks my butt, and she gets life back in focus really fast for me. She has that ability to do it, and it doesn't take her very long, by the way. It only takes her about 5 or 10 seconds, and that also keeps me very, very grounded, by the way. If you've got somebody, you start thinking that you're better than other people. By the way, that's not a good thought. We're all on the level here, and she'll either take me apart, usually verbally, and put things back in perspective pretty fast. I appreciate that. Having somebody who's there as an anchor, and that's what she is really incredibly helpful for me, and hopefully I'm the same for her and helpful for her. And it makes me a better farmer. It makes me a better meat cutter. It made me a better teacher when I was a teacher and a school board member. And it certainly makes me a better senator. And it's because she's there keeping life in perspective for me.
Well, I think in this age of people being cynical and thinking, oh, well, you have to say that. I can tell you, knowing both of you, how genuine that is and how fortunate I am to have kind of the same relationship, someone who loves you unconditionally, who believes in you unconditionally, whose goals they share, they're willing to sacrifice for the public good that you're trying to promote, but yet they'll yank your chain pretty damn fast if you get.
What I always, it's interesting because I think good communication and honest communication is critically important in a good marriage. I think it's critically important in business, and I think it's critically important in government. and Charlotte has taught me how to communicate and communicate honestly.
Well, you're a very, very lucky man. I haven't had a chance to meet your two daughters, but I certainly know Sean, and I know the love that he's experienced. And when you grow up in a family where, you know, there may be disputes, but you know, at the core, there's a respect and a pride and a love. That is the greatest gift we can give our kids. And so you guys have done such an amazing job being grounded as a family and finding space to take your talents nationally. I want to talk a little bit about your two teachers. You talk about them quite a bit, and in fact, a fun story at the end after you get to be a United States Senator. But the two teachers are someone you only identified as coach. And I noticed that the teacher who was positive in your life, you identified by their name, Mr. B. And so I want to talk about how that's the yin and yang of motivation, and how both of these teachers motivated you to be the person you are today.
Yeah. So I will preface this by saying, you know, I mean, today, even the teacher that I wasn't fond of in high school, I have a tremendous amount of respect for, and quite frankly, see him probably once a year, just happen to run into him, and we're on a very friendly basis. Bygones are bygones. But the truth is, when I was in high school, it's a small school, okay? People wanted you to play football, and they wanted you to play basketball, and they wanted you to run track, and they wanted you to do all this stuff. And quite frankly, I helped my dad on the farm a lot, and so football didn't really work most of, you know, first third of the season. And same thing, I'm missing 3 fingers due to let me see if I can get that up there, due to a meat grinder accident. So I think that maybe they thought that I couldn't play basketball as well as somebody that had 10, and maybe they were right. So there was a little bit of I thought unfair treatment when I was in high school, quite frankly, but I lived through it, and there were some things that he taught me that absolutely turned out to be true. You know, he would call us sheep because we weren't thinking for ourselves. I hated it because I knew what that name actually meant, and I wasn't a follower. But it motivated him. It motivated me to not only prove him wrong, but go to college and get a degree because I didn't think I could do it, and be successful on the farm and be successful, period. Then I had another teacher who was my speech teacher who, after I washed out in athletics, I decided to take up speech, which was the best decision of my life, and went in speech and debate and extempore speaking. And he was an amazing teacher and an amazing man. And he motivated by, even if I did things that weren't as good as I could have done, he'd say, man, you did that great, and here's why you did it great. If you want to improve on something, you could maybe take a look at this. And I'll tell you that I would literally run through walls for that guy. He was an amazing teacher, just an amazing master teacher. And it affected a lot of kids, by the way, in the small school I went to. I don't think you'll hear anybody tell a different story than what I tell, that this guy was just a real positive influence. And he passed away here a few years ago. But the truth is that when he was alive, I would often just call him up, not regularly, but just every once in a while, and say, hey, B, what do you think about this? Or what would you do if you're in this shoes? And he was just a good guy. And it was just 2 different ways that motivated me. One of them I didn't like too much, but it was effective. The other one I liked a lot.
That when you feel like you have something to prove, you can really do some pretty amazing things. And, you know, I remember, John, when I graduated from law school, neither one of my parents went to college, and we were first generation college goers. And, you know, I called up my dad and, you know, kind of graduated from law school. And he said, well, you got to take that test, meaning the bar exam. So he was always setting the bar a little bit higher, always challenging me to reach a little higher and not be satisfied where we're at. And that's what I think is the beauty of education and educators. I can tell you, when I talk to kids, behind their parents and their grandparents, the people who have had the most amount of influence in their life are educators, not a United States senator, not a governor. It's the person that they know who supported them for good or bad, that propelled them forward. I'm going to take just a question. Someone asked this from the audience. They said, "What my 15-year-old son would like to get involved in politics. What advice would you give him today based on your life experiences? And what advice should this gentleman or woman pass on to their 15-year-old son?"
So different people take different routes to public service, and I will just tell you that I think the best thing that a young person can do, 15 years old, is look around their school and say, how can I make this place better? And then get some kids together and talk to your teachers and administrators, make sure that they're okay with it, and work to make the place better. And if it's not the school, it's the town. Walk up and down the streets and say, what can, it might be something as simple as just, cleaning the sidewalks off, or removing the leaves when the leaves start falling. But start by making your community a better place, whether that community is in your school or actually in front of your house or wherever it may be, and try to bring people along to join you. People pay attention to that. People my age pay attention to kids who are in high school that are working to make the world a better place, and we remember those people. And when we need somebody maybe to work in my office, or they get a hold of you and say, can you help us out here? You remember that kind of stuff, and so that's what I would do. Look, I did a different route than probably Heidi did. I mean, I spent the first 20 years on the farm just doing local public service, doing school board and soil conservation and the FSA board, and I was on organic certification board. Now, I didn't do that with the eye of being a U.S. Senator someday. I never thought I would be a U.S. Senator. It wasn't something that was even on my radar screen. But because I did those things, when I did decide to run for the state legislature, which was on my radar screen from the time I was in high school, it made it a lot easier because people knew that I would work and accomplish things and move the ball forward. So I would just say, look at your community, find out where you can make a difference, get some folks to help you and make a difference.
Yeah, I want to turn, there's other questions coming in, but I do want to talk about some shared experiences, Jon, that we had. And obviously the big difference is you took some tough votes, I took some tough votes. You survived in Montana. I did not survive my reelection bid. And the authenticity, the sense of community, building that base. But sometimes in politics, you just get lucky with the right opponents, and you get people who take it for granted. And one of the things that I was struck by in the book, as you were talking about each one of your individual campaigns and how each one had a different challenge, from a primary to running against an incumbent when no one thought you could win, to running against a sitting congressman who really thought he was going to win, and then running again in a year that Donald Trump was out after you big time. And each one of those experiences, I'm just struck by the fact about debates, because you've never been afraid to share the stage with anyone. You've never been afraid to come in and let's get ready to rumble. But somehow all these opponents seem to be afraid of debating you. Can you explain that to me and to our listeners and viewers right now?
I can't. I mean, I really can't. I mean, I can tell you that I ran across some folks who, when they ran against me, tried to make me into something different than I was. And they were trying to make themselves into something different than they were. And quite frankly, I think it really is hard to debate unless you are who you are. And I think that might have been the problem. You can't bounce all over the place. If you're jumping on one side and then jumping to the other side and then jump to the other side and then jump to the other side, a lot of jumping. It's really hard to debate because you're not grounded. You don't stand for anything. And I think that was part of it in some of the cases. The other part, quite frankly, Heidi, in some of these elections is you're exactly right. I got lucky. If the election where I beat a 3-term incumbent, my first election in 2006, the same year Sherrod Brown got elected, I might add, if that election would have been a week later, I really doubt I would have won, because quite frankly, things were starting to turn the wrong direction for me about 5 days before that election, and we could see it in our polling. But I got lucky. And we ran a hell of a campaign too, by the way. I had some great people around me, and I didn't make any mistakes. But sometimes that doesn't matter, and the best person doesn't win. And so you just try to do the best you can do, and try to win these damn things. But when it comes to debating, I don't think people should ever shy away from debating. I'm not sure it changes a lot of people's minds, but I think it does a lot for your own self-esteem to be able to get on the stage and go toe-to-toe with your opponent on issues of importance. And I think it really helps. It helps you when you go out into other venues, because now you know that you know this stuff better than the person that you just debated. And that makes a big difference. That kind of positivity that you put off can make a difference, more so than even the debate. And it's all driven by the debate.
Well, we have a question about polarization, John, which is how do we, that now neighbors can't even talk to neighbors, and there's some stories about things happening in Maine with mailboxes, and I won't get into all of that. But we see it right here in North Dakota, where it used to be a friendly kind of jab back and forth conversation. It has turned into anger and fear. And so how do we get back to having those conversations? In your case, in Big Sandy, in my case, Manador, North Dakota, a town of 90 people that I grew up in, where, you knew who the Democrats were, you knew who the Republicans were, but they figured out how to get money to the fire hall to fund a fire truck. But yet people don't feel like that's what the political system is doing right now. How do we get back to that values that we grew up with watching politics?
It's a great question, Heidi, and it's the key to a democracy that functions. Being able to work across party lines, being able to compromise, being able to get things done. I'll just be right frank with you, and you know this. I'm a moderate. Heidi's a moderate when she's in the Senate. If there are two people that would have been willing to roll up their sleeves and work with the president, it certainly would have been me, and I know it would have been Heidi Heitkamp. The president's reaction to that was to go out and slam me and call me every name in the book, like he does just about everybody. By the way, anybody that says anything about him that's negative, his response is always negative. Rather than look at it himself, he always thinks it's somebody else's fault. If we're going to get people back working together, we've got to have somebody different at the top. We have to. This person is, Trump is an incredible divider. I've never seen anything like it in my life. I will tell you this. When I first got there, George Bush was president. I was not a big fan of the Iraq War. George Bush had me over to the White House a number of times, and I found that George Bush wasn't a bad guy at all. In fact, George Bush was a pretty good guy. He had some people around him that weren't very good, in my opinion. It's not the case. I was at the White House a couple of times, as was Heidi. I did not have that opinion when I walked out of the White House after talking with President Trump. My thought was, this guy is very, very self-centered, and he's not looking out for what my constituents want. He's looking out for what he wants in his best interest, not the country's best interest. So you've got to have somebody at the top, Heidi, that's willing to bring people together. It's really critically important. And the reason why that's important is because when you go down the street, you've got to be able to find something that you have in common. And what this president has done over and over again, regardless, if you've got a D by your name, he denigrates you. If you got an R by your name, he says you're just wonderful. And you cannot create those kind of divisions.
Yeah.
Well, there's a couple, that Flake would say, no, I challenged him. And Corker would probably say the same thing. And there's a couple others, but not very many, by the way, just the ones that challenge him.
Yeah, I want to talk a little bit about rural America, because your book talks about how you were able to win in a very rural state that I think Trump won by what, 14 points or 15 points in Montana?
21 plus.
21. Well, it was 36 for North Dakota. So, yeah. But,
I can't compete with you, man. I can't.
I know. I outperform, but just not at that level. And I think that rural America was looking for something different than what they had gotten in the last 8 years of the Obama administration. And if we as Democrats don't acknowledge that, Jon, we really are fooling ourselves. It's like, oh, we didn't communicate. That's all true. But yet they were looking for something different. And they're good people in rural America. They are not, people who are biased or racist and we've got to win some of them back. And so what lessons have you learned in the last, after the 18 campaign, but coming into this next cycle? What lessons have you learned and advice you could give to somebody running in a state like Montana, running in a state like North Dakota?
Number one, you have to show up. It's a basic rule of politics. If you don't show up, you cannot make the inroads you need to do to be able to have a victory in anywhere, quite frankly. And it's true in rural America. And I will tell you, I don't think Democrats have showed up as often as they needed to in rural America. Second thing I would say is you've got to be authentic, honest, however you want to put it. Don't try to be something you're not. Third thing I would say is when you go to rural America, and by the way, I think this works everywhere. It works in Toledo as well as it does in Big Sandy. You've got two ears and one mouth, act accordingly. Listen, don't tell folks what you think they should know. Let them tell you what they know. And then try to find common ground and move forward in the conversation in a way that can make positive change. I would say those are three things. And look, I mean, if you want to compare, for example, Joe Biden and Donald Trump in rural America, Biden has some real positive advantages. Number one, he wasn't born with a silver spoon in his mouth. He's had to work for everything he's got. He's fought for health care that's accessible, affordable throughout the country, especially in rural America. He believes in public education as a foundational issue for this country. He thinks that Social Security and Medicare needs to be around for generations to come. He thinks we should take care of our veterans and treat them with the responsibility and respect that this country needs to treat them with. And he believes in infrastructure. I will tell you, those 5 things that I just listed are things that the Democrats stand for. They absolutely believe in those things. And quite frankly, if you take a look at what they've tried to do, the Republicans have tried to do with the Affordable Care Act, Obamacare. They are the same thing, by the way. And what they've tried to do with public education to privatize it and voucherize it. What they've tried to do with Medicare and Social Security, I mean, Social Security, the president just took a big whack out of it the 1st of August. And quite frankly, veterans, we had to fight like hell. And by the way, Sherrod Brown was one that fought together with me to get the Agent Orange veterans, the Blue Water veterans covered, and to get the presumptives covered for cancers that were caused by the Vietnam's veterans' exposure to toxins. So Agent Orange. So all those things are in our camp. We just need to go out and talk about it and make sure that people know what Democrats are fighting for. But you got to show up to do that.
Well, and absolutely. And when you think about Montana, and people always ask me, Jon did better than you did in Montana than you did in North Dakota. I always say, everybody thinks Montana's purple. I said, as you move west in Montana, it gets green. And by that, I mean the appreciation that you have for the natural resource that you have that promotes tourism and that provides you with that Montana experience that is so awesome. I'm not saying North Dakota is not beautiful, but I've spent a lot of time in your state in Bozeman and Missoula and Great Falls and and up in Casbell. These are beautiful places, Jon, absolutely stunningly beautiful. And Montanans want to preserve them. We have a question from the audience about how can we convince people that we're only renting this earth, we're only on this earth for a short period of time and we have to treat it accordingly. What would be your advice and how do you talk about, in a conservative state, talk about your ethics and your values as it relates to the environment?
I don't know if the person that wrote that has read my book or not, but if you haven't, you need to read what I told my grandkids in that book. That's what I dedicated it to, and you need to read what I wrote to them. Look, it is a fact. If we screw this place up, our kids and our grandkids are not going to have the opportunity. What is it, Heidi? You said we're the first generation to. You say it. It's your words.
Well, I said, the baby boomers, who
Yep.
that's you and
You
we are going to be the first generation in American history that inherited from our parents. And we inherited a free world. We inherited infrastructure. We inherited belief in community. And we're borrowing from our kids, and we're leaving nothing positive behind. And that is a condemnation of baby boomers that we can't escape. But it's not too late for us to step up and be part of the solution.
It is not too late. But the truth is that is an example of how we need to treat the earth too. We inherited a good earth. We should make it better for our kids than we inherited. It's something my father told me quite a bit. In fact, I just want this world to be a better place for you than it was for me. And if you've got dirty air and polluted water, that puts you in a real negative. You take a look at third world countries, man. When they trash their resource bases, that's when they become third world countries. So all you have to do is look around this earth, and you can see what works and you can see what doesn't. And let's go with what works. And what works is making sure that the earth, you take care of what you have, so that when you pass it on to the kids, not only have you been able to enjoy it, but they will be able to too. Now, I'm not talking about going out and camping. I'm talking about being able to drink a glass of water without getting sick, and things like that. I mean, it's just absolutely imperative important. We're on this earth that long. Our kids are on this earth that long. We ought not be screwing it up.
Well, I was struck in your book, Jon, because I think a lot of people are curious about farming. They're curious certainly about organic farming, but I was really struck by the fact that when you were talking about irrigation, what that does to the soil and makes it even more alkaline, and understanding the ground that we're standing on. In my office, I had a soil column, and my staff was like, oh my God, we're going to put a big column of, it was like, 5 feet. And I said, it's North Dakota's most valuable natural resource. We have to care for it. We have to support it, because what we do is production agriculture. And I think you, coming from the soil, you have a unique perspective in the United States Senate as somebody who has made their living putting seeds in the ground. There's nobody else like you. There's nobody else like you, not in the House, not in the Senate. And that perspective comes out so beautifully in your book, but it also comes out in what you're willing to stand up for against a lot of pressure from conservatives in your state to reflect a different value. And it's one of the reasons why I hate to say this, because you and I have so much fun teasing back and forth, but you are truly a unique character in the United States Senate. I think that coming from the places that we come from, whether it's Big Sandy or Manitoba or North Dakota, I think we have a unique perspective about the job of being a United States Senator, but also a really unique perspective of the responsibility of citizenship. And so I'd like you just for a minute, Jon, to talk about that responsibility of citizenship and how, like John Kennedy, who inspired you, who inspired me, who said, ask not what you can do, what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country. How do we reestablish that sense of responsibility to each other in these very difficult times?
It actually goes back to that question that the lady asked about her 15-year-old son, quite frankly. It's about how you make the world a better place. And that's what we should all be trying to achieve. It goes back to the question about we're renting this planet from our kids. What do we do about it? Well, you take care of the planet, and you give it to your kids in better shape, then you got it. You know, we're 45 days away from an election. It's about making sure that you vote and that your opinion is counted. That's how this country works. It's probably the most important thing we can do is voting. And yet a large percentage of the folks out there don't vote, and they need to vote because this is their country too. And their voice is very, very, very important moving forward. So it's about looking around, and it's about making your world and the people that live in your world better. And I just think that, you know, and look, I've never lived in a big town. I've lived on this place basically for 64 years, and went to college, got a degree in music for 4 years, go back and forth to DC. Now I'm in the Senate, but basically I've lived here my entire life. And if you don't look and try to make the world a better place, then it's going to go to pot. And you do that by looking out for others and looking out for the world around you. And I think that's the definition of good citizenship.
We have a question from somebody who is watching, who says, what are the real differences between the priorities of rural America and urban America?
You know what? I don't know that there are a lot of differences, quite frankly. I think in urban America, healthcare is a big issue. It certainly is a big issue in rural America. Now, you might, let me deal with this just for a second. You know what? That's what happens when you got brothers, but I just hung up on them. Where the hell was I?
Talking about the difference.
You know, we might have to drive a little further, but accessibility to healthcare is important no matter where you live. And we might be in a little more dangerous business than some of the people who live in urban America, those of us in agriculture. But that doesn't matter. You still need access, and it's got to be affordable. If it's accessible and not affordable, we haven't accomplished a thing. So I think those are both it. I would hope that public education is just as important in urban America as it is in rural America. I hope it's a high priority. If it isn't, we need to make it a high priority. That's something else we can do. I can tell you that rural America is aging. I think the average farmer is 59 years old. I think the last statistic I saw. So things like Social Security and Medicare is really, really, really important. And by the way, infrastructure, our roads, our bridges, broadband, making sure, I mean, if this pandemic's taught us anything, it's that if we're going to, you know, distance learn and have telemedicine, we've got to have good broadband. And I think that's important in urban America too. So I don't know that there's anything out there. I mean, we may look at climate change differently from an urban standpoint than a rural standpoint, but I don't think it's a massive difference. I think the key to solving these tough issues like climate change, and it is a tough issue, by the way, is getting folks to the table and forming collaboratives and listening to people, and then finding out what that common ground is and moving forward with things so people don't think they're being attacked. And so I think it's the same thing in urban America. Bring people together, let them say their piece, find out where the common ground is, and move forward. So yeah, I don't know. I mean, off the top of my head, maybe you can, Heidi, but I can't think of something that.
No, John, when I'm asked this question, and I'm asked it quite a bit, what I say is, you know what, that cab driver, maybe first generation American in New York City, you know what he wants? He wants his kids to have great schools. He wants his family protected. He wants, or she wants, good quality health care if they get sick. They want to be close to their parents, and they want to experience the American experience and home ownership. None of that is different. And we spend so much time in this country trying to divide the country by demographics and by regional differences. And at the end of the day, the America that I know is an America with the same common values. And when we start saying, this is, you know, and frequently you see this is real America. Well, all of America's real America, and everybody is entitled to those economic opportunities. And the one thing we know is we have additional types of challenges, but the dreams and aspirations of rural Americans are identical to what you're going to see in any part of the country. And to me, that's part of why we started something like the One Country Project, which I started to kind of reconnect our party to rural America and rural America to our party. And one thing that we're proud of as Democrats is we're the party of FDR. We are the party, and Jon, I love your book because you talk about how your grandparents were FDR Democrats. That's the tradition I grew up in, because they believed in keeping people on the farm and keeping those small family farms viable. And that's a legacy. And let's talk a little bit about that. That's a legacy that's at risk, that small family farmer. And you talk about this in the book about, Eisenhower not being popular with farmers because Benson, who is his Secretary of Agriculture, said, you got to get bigger to be successful. Well, we had exactly that. Sonny Perdue went to Wisconsin and said, if you don't get bigger, you aren't going to survive. Well, that's not his job. His job is to figure out how to get every farmer to survive and thrive. And if we consolidate our food chain that way, that is a disaster for our national security, in my opinion. And I know you share this belief.
Well, it's a disaster.
In the book.
By the way, and it's a disaster for rural America, and it's a disaster for urban America if you consume food. It's a disaster across the board. Look, during the 30s, it was a very difficult time for farms across this nation. And FDR, my grandfather said we'd lost this place if it wasn't for FDR. FDR came in, he gave us rural electrification. He made sure we had the government had our back so we could stay on the farm. And quite frankly, I remember that. People say that, all this talk about government being bad and all that stuff. Look, government needs to be, you need to watch government. You need to make sure that government doesn't overstep. But the truth is, government plays a very, very important role in this nation in job creation and making sure that things work. Take a look at the pandemic, for example. If we had a government at the federal level that worked as well as the governments at the state level, this pandemic wouldn't be as big a problem as it is today. And that's because the guy at the top doesn't get it. But FDR did. And because of that, my grandparents attributed our ability to stay on this farm during the most difficult times in agriculture, the 1930s. So, I mean, we complain today, but it ain't nothing like it was back then. And because of that, my folks were able to spend from 1943 to 1978 on this farm, and my wife and I have been able to spend from 78 till 2020, and hopefully until my grandkids or one of my grandkids, I don't know which one, want to take it over. So I think it's important we recognize what FDR did. And by the way, what he did for my grandfather and grandmother, he did for every farmer around this country. We weren't special. He did it for everybody. Yeah. And it's why we ended up with the greatest generation, I believe. And now we need to get back to that point.
Well, Jon, we're up against the clock, but I want to encourage everybody to access this book, whether you want to listen to it on audio, whether you want to rent it from the library or borrow it from the library, whether you want to go out and buy a copy, which would even be better. I want you to understand that you're reading a book about the most extraordinary, ordinary person I know. And that sounds contradictory, but it's about someone who is extraordinary in our political dialogue today, because he comes from places that all of us can understand and appreciate, in an ordinary life with an extraordinary personality and an extraordinary family that propelled him to provide an incredible level of leadership. And so I am so proud to call Jon my friend and to be referred to as Jon Tester in a skirt. I'm okay with that. But somehow that visual is not very good, but I'll leave that at you. But we're going to turn this back to Jason. But Jon, thank you so much for the conversation. thank you for writing this extraordinary book that gives people in Toledo a glimpse of what it's like to grow up where we grew up, what it's like to live your experience. It really is a remarkable book.
Thank you.
I can't thank you enough. I just want to say one thing before I turn to Jason. My folks always said, when you're pointing one finger at somebody, there's three pointing right back at you. You're no slouch in your own right. I'll just tell you that. Thank you.
Love you, John. Love you too, Charlene.
I appreciate both so much. I honestly, I hope the folks that are watching and joining us feel as privileged as I do. I feel like we got to eavesdrop on a conversation between two friends who are both so knowledgeable and civically engaged, and just a real inspiration. So I really appreciate you taking the time. And thanks to you all for joining us. Please do pick up that book at your local independent bookseller, at your library, and learn as much as you can from it. So thank you both for joining us tonight, and I really appreciate everything.
Take care.
Jason.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you.